Hello. This sermon audio is a ministry of the Town Church in Fort Collins, Colorado. If you would like to learn more about us, how to connect, or how to support us, go to our website, thetownchurch.org. While listening to the Bible preached is a healthy part of our spiritual formation, it is not the whole picture. So if you aren't a part of a local church, we encourage you to prayerfully commit to a local body of believers where you live. We're glad you can join us, and we hope God uses the following sermon to reveal more of His glory to you.
Again, my name is Vince. I'm one of the elders here, the teaching pastor. If we haven't met, I would love to meet you. If you have a Bible near you, go ahead and grab it. Turn to Exodus chapter 12 this morning, Exodus 12. We'll finish out Exodus 12. We'll jump into a little bit of chapter 13. We've been working through the book, and we'll continue to do that. Even through Advent, I think we see some themes that will connect in the book of Exodus. We are in the holiday groove, aren't we? We're in the holiday season. Decorations are up. Christmas songs have been played for 3-4 months now. They've been played, and decorations are going. The holiday is here. And I've talked about this before, but I'll mention it again. My wife, Kirsten, does an amazing job of welcoming us into this holiday. She looks forward to it. If it were up to her, she'd be listening to Christmas music in June, building up toward a beautiful time together. You've heard this before, probably. If you've been to our house, you've seen it. You've seen the maze that this is. We have 5 boys, and she has put together 5 different Advent calendars. And so each boy gets a different little gift from each calendar at different days, and they rotate through, and there's some spreadsheet and flowchart somewhere that she has in her mind that it helps her get through all of that. But she does an amazing job of pointing us toward and making this a season to remember. Right? We're in holiday mode. We're in holiday mode as a family. We're in holiday mode now as a church. We're in holiday mode as a city. Everything is pointing toward this holiday, and I think something we need to be mindful of in this season is this. With all the hype surrounding the season and the holiday parties and the decorations, we've got to keep in mind what we are celebrating. Now, I know you just heard that, and you thought to yourself, yes, of course he's going to stand up there and say that. That's what the pastor says. Jesus is the reason for the season and all of that. But I don't want that to hit ears that make it seem simple and elementary. Right? I don't want it to be that way. We come to this season and we know this stuff theoretically, don't we? We know, yes, this is all about Jesus. We come to Sunday mornings and we hear the Advent readings, we sing the songs, and the focal point being God sending His Son, Jesus, to earth to redeem. So we get that theoretically, don't we? We understand that theoretically. But is it the common thread running through our hearts and minds during this season? I ask that sincerely. Is that actually the common thread that runs through our hearts and mind? And I would say not just in this season, but in all of life, because all of life is to be pointing us and directing us to God. That all of this is about God. He is over all things. He's sovereign. Whether we want to recognize that or not, God is absolutely the focus. So don't allow that to be simple and elementary. Don't allow that to sink in. Don't walk through the holiday season with the constant in-your-face reminder from songs and readings and decorations and parties. Don't allow that to be there and not be affected in some way that God is over all things, that Jesus Christ is central. Don't waste this holiday as an individual, as a married couple, as a family. Don't waste it. Don't walk through it and see all of the stuff and not have a focus on the God who saves. And so as a family, for us, as Kirsten does such a wonderful job drawing our family into the celebration tangibly, we then have to come together as a family and begin to direct our hearts to the reason behind all of the hype that is there. That's got to be central. What a waste it would be for us to do what we do as a family, to celebrate without something grounding us to the reality that the God of the universe, in love and in great joy, sent his Son to redeem and to reconcile. What a waste it would be if we did not focus on that. And so this morning, as we look at our passage in Exodus, I want to remind us of that same kind of truth. That the Exodus is about God. We can't miss that. We've seen that over and over. I think we so often walk through the Exodus story and our focus becomes what? The people, right? I mean, even the very name of it directs our attention to the people being freed. Is anybody else there where you begin to read through the story and you just begin to focus on the people and what will happen? So in other words, it would go like this. If somebody asked you, what is the book of Exodus about? If you're anything like me, you would probably answer, it's about the Israelites who were enslaved in Egypt being freed from slavery. And so your mind goes in that direction. It's about the people. And sure, there are subplots with Moses as the leader and then lessons learned from the people wandering in the desert and so on. And just like with the celebration around Christmas, I would say, sure, we understand that God is actively involved in the story. We get it theoretically. But what I want to do is I want to keep in front of us that this is God's story of redemption. Throughout the entire process, it is God who provides. It is God who saves. And sure, the people benefit, right? The people get the blessings from God's provision and God's salvation. That's absolutely true. But the focus is not the people. The focus is the God who saved them. It is God's story of redemption. And so I want us to see that today as we walk through the passage, that this is absolutely about God. Now, last week, what we did is we walked through the events of the Passover, the brutal events of the Passover that point us to the reality of these events, that God swept through Egypt, taking the lives of the firstborn sons sons and daughters from every house in Egypt. The Israelites were instructed, however, to kill a lamb, paint the door frames with its blood, and stay inside. And the grace and the mercy and the loving kindness and the promises of God in those things, the Israelites were spared. Because of the blood, their firstborn child, their firstborn animals were untouched. Their lives were spared. That was of who? That was of God. That was from God. And now the passage in front of us, we see God providing. Let me show you. Look at Exodus 12, starting in verse 33. God provides. It's God who provides. Look at verse 33. The Egyptians were urgent with the people to send them out of the land in haste. For they said, we shall all be dead. So the people took their dough before it was leavened, their kneading bowls being bound up in their cloaks on their shoulders. The people of Israel had also done as Moses told them, for they had asked the Egyptians for silver and gold jewelry and for clothing, and the Lord had given the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so that they let them have what they asked. Thus, they plundered the Egyptians. I think we can stop right there and see that God is providing. We see it. God provides. And here's what he provides for us. This is going to sound strange, but let me walk through this. God provides the urgency and the pressure of the Egyptians to cause the Israelite people to leave. God provides the urgency and the pressure of the Egyptians that then causes the Israelite people to leave. Now that may sound strange, but think about the situation. We're told that they were enslaved in Egypt for 430 years. Right? Yes, they were enslaved and treated harshly. That's true. Yes, they were living in a land that was not their own land. All of that is true. But anything outside of Egypt was unknown for them. It was unknown. Anything outside of Egypt was unknown. So here's a question that comes to mind with that. How many times have you been in less than ideal situations, but you've stayed there because it's familiar and easy? How many times have you been just in normal life? How many times have you been in less than ideal situations, but you've stayed there because it's just easier? then push that into your heart and how that responds. How many times have you persisted in some kind of sinful situation because you're uncertain how to live outside of that situation? Have you been there? Where you don't even know how to walk outside of that. So I want us to not assume that all of the Israelites were enthusiastically embracing the idea that they would get to leave the city, the only city they knew. Don't just assume, oh, they were so thankful. I think we've got to assume, and we'll see this later in chapter 16, that the people didn't necessarily want to leave. They knew it. It was safe and comfortable. They in chapter 16, they begin to complain to Moses, and they look back at their time in Egypt with fondness. At least we had bread and meat there. You brought us out here to die. Is God at work now, using your current situation, whatever that is, to awake you to the reality that a life of following Him, a life of worshiping Him, is actually better? Is God awakening you to that? Consider that God provides the urgency and the pressure of the Egyptians to cause the Israelite people to leave Egypt. And so the Egyptians say, get out of here quickly or we're all going to die. Get out. God provided that. God provided that urgency. This is about God. And then secondly, I think we see that God provides in just daily sustenance. We can't miss that. The people are being urgently forced out by the Egyptians. They didn't have time to allow their bread to rise, but they didn't need that time because God has already instructed them that making unleavened bread was the way they should go. They were prepared for this very moment by the God who is freeing them. It's almost as if God knew something was coming, right? There's my little sovereignty of God joke, right? It's almost as if He knew something was coming. Hey, you're not going to have time to preheat the oven, roll out the dough, and so you're going to have to get it together now. Be ready. Why would God instruct them in that way, other than to provide them provide for their daily immediate needs? Why would God instruct them with this unleavened bread instructions unless He was about to provide for something they were going to need right then? God knew what was going to go down. The people already had bowls of dough ready to go, and so they slung them over their shoulders and they headed out. That was of God. God was providing. And listen, is God any different today? I think we look back at this and we think, well, God was helping them and giving them instructions about their daily needs. But is He any different today? He's not. God is providing for your daily needs. And you may be saying, no, He's not. You don't know my story. You don't know my situation. And you're right, I don't know everything about your current situation, but I do know that if you have anything good, that came from God. If you have anything good today, that came from God because He is the one providing. Don't miss that. In fact, when Jesus taught His disciples to pray, we learn that He taught them to pray asking God for daily bread today. Every good and every perfect gift comes from God. So take that into consideration. Don't be like, here I am, I'm the pastor who's going to say, don't be like them. Don't be like what we see in the Israelites later when they begin to grumble and complain about what they have. Seriously, bread again, God? Seriously, just quail? Yes, all of that from the gracious giving, providing hand of God. And so I would ask you, what rhythm do you have in your life where you're reminded daily to think about what is it that God has provided for me? What is it that God has done in His provide? What's your daily rhythm there? I've said this before, I'll say it again. As a family, what we've done, a rhythm for us, is that we end our night, every evening together as a family, thanking God for something during that day. And we spend some time writing them down in books, and so we've got books and books and books of these. For years, we've just written these things down, and we look back on them, and we see the things that God has done. So, for instance, July 22nd, 2011, Kirsten was thankful that her bike was fixed. I was thankful for rest that day. Asher was thankful for a backyard. Obed was thankful for Solomon and the new baby, right? That could be almost any year in our family, that a new baby was coming, right? Solomon was thankful for chickens and mommy, right? Same level, chickens and mommy. Ezra was thankful for a car to go places, and on and on. And we just have written these down for years and years. And we look back on them, and we see, look what God's provided. That comes from the gracious and giving hand of an all-providing God who gives good gifts. So what rhythm do you have in your day to look back on what God has done that day? God provides. Third, not only does God provide daily, but I think the third way we see God providing is long-term for the Israelites. Long-term. He's had this planned out for years and years and years. For centuries, he's had this planned out. We're told that the people asked the Egyptians for their silver and gold jewelry and their clothing. In verse 36, we see that the Lord gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. They gave them silver, gold, and clothing. And so we don't think that there was just the generosity of the Egyptians with a parting gift, right? Hey, on your journey, let me give you some stuff. So we don't think that. We're told that they plundered the Egyptians. This is war talk. This is them going in and conquering the Egyptians and plundering them. This is of God. We can't see it any other way, that God provides long-term for the Israelites. Now, we don't know why God chose to have them plunder the Egyptians. There's nothing said about the why. Some would say that God knew they were going to be in the wilderness for 40 years, and God knew that they were going to need clothing, and God knew that they were going to need ways to purchase things from traveling merchants. And some would say that God knew that they were going to be wandering for 40 years, and God knew what they were going to need long term. I was talking to my dad between services, and he said it's also very possible that God knew that he was going to have a way for them to worship him in a tabernacle with lots of gold in it. Where would they get that? God knew what they were going to need, and so God provided. And these are promises of God going all the way back to Abram. Promises that he would be a great nation. And then in Genesis 15 we see, then the Lord said to Abram, know for certain that your offspring will be sojourners in a land that is not theirs, and will be servants there, and they will be afflicted for 400 years. But I will bring judgment on the nation that they serve. And here's what we need to see. And afterward they shall come out with great possession. So Moses is now being in the process of that promise being fulfilled, and Moses is reminded of that promise at the burning bush, isn't he, in Exodus 3? So where God says, so I'll stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all the wonders that I will do. After that, Pharaoh, will let you go, and I will give this people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. And when you go, you shall not go empty, but each woman, and he goes on and talk about how they're going to plunder the Egyptians. This is a promise from God hundreds of years previous. This is a promise of God that he's fulfilling now in Moses and the people, providing for his people. This is of God. We can't see it any other way. This is of God. And so often we look at his provision and we either don't think much of it because we've come to expect it, or we grumble and complain and doubt that he's going to provide because we don't see it happening in the ways that we want it to happen. And we turn what God has provided into an object of worship, don't we? God's provided this, and now I'm going to lean in the direction of worshiping that thing. We'll see this later in Exodus, where the people take the very things that God has provided from plundering the Egyptians, and they melt it down and create a statue that they can worship. Taken the things that God's given, and they've done something that's offensive to God. And we look at that and we think, well, that's foolish. But don't we do the same kind of thing regularly? Taking the good gift from God, turning it into something we can worship. I'm going to reveal something to you this morning, a confession of mine. I think we're in a place in our relationship where I can do this. I'm a fan of rap. Okay, so Jesus still loves me, and you will too when you come around. But I'm a fan of rap, and here's what I've seen over the last weeks. There's a rap trio, Beautiful Eulogy. They released a track. That's what they do, tracks, not songs. All right, so you'll get it. They released a track a few months ago, and it describes, I think, what we often do. This has hit me in a profound way, and I'm not going to rap it. I'll just say it. They say, when a good God gives good gifts, we generally tend to twist the list and take the list of good gifts that God tends to give and make general gods out of gifts. I suppose what exposes the worship in most of us is a close look at most of our thoughts, fears, and emotions. Boom, right? Or wiggy wiggy, or whatever, right? So that... God provides. God provides. Do we see that gift as coming from God, or do we twist that around and see that as something that we then begin to worship? This is about God. This is not about you. This is not about me. This is about God. Not about the good gifts, but the giver, the giver and the provider who sent his son to, what we just sang, ransom captive Israel, to ransom you and me. Into eternity, we will celebrate that this is about God. God provides. What else do we see in chapter 12? Let's read on. We see that God saves. Now again, I don't want that to seem simple and elementary, that God saves. God saves. Allow that to be seared into your hearts, that if not for God and His grace shown through His Son, there is no salvation. Do you get that? That if not for God and His grace shown through His Son, there is no salvation. This is what Peter and John were saying when they are arrested and thrown before the council in Acts 4. They said, there is salvation in no one else, for there is no other name under heaven given among men by which we must be saved. And so we can see that, we can read it, we can recite those truths. But does it actually hit us deeply that salvation comes from God alone? Not from something that we've done. Not from some good that we've done. Not from anyone or anything else. That God is the one who saves. Let's look. Chapter 12. We'll finish this out. Chapter 12, starting in verse 37. It says, and the people of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Succoth, about 600,000 men on foot, besides women and children. A mixed multitude also went up with them, and very much livestock, both flocks and herds. And they baked unleavened cakes of the dough that they had brought out of Egypt, for it was not leavened, because they were thrust out of Egypt and could not wait, nor had they prepared any provisions for themselves. The time that the people of Israel lived in Egypt was 430 years. At the end of 430 years, on that very day, all the hosts of the Lord went out from the land of Egypt. It was a night of watching by the Lord to bring them out of the land of Egypt. So this same night is a night of watching kept to the Lord by all the people of Israel throughout their generations. And the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, this is a statute of the Passover. No foreigner shall eat of it, but every slave that is bought for money may eat of it after you have circumcised him. No foreigner or hired worker may eat of it. It shall be eaten in one house. You shall not take any of the flesh outside the house, and you shall not break any of its bones. All the congregation of Israel shall keep it. If a stranger shall sojourn with you and would keep the Passover to the Lord, let all his males be circumcised. Then he may come near and keep it. He shall be as a native of the land, but no uncircumcised person shall eat of it. There shall be one law for the native and for the stranger who sojourns among you. All the people of Israel did just as the Lord commanded Moses and Aaron. And on that very day, the Lord brought the people of Israel out of the land of Egypt by their hosts. God saves. It's God. This is the story of God's redemption, and we see it, I think, in very poignant ways in this passage. In verse 37, the people of Israel begin their journey from Ramses to Sukkoth. We're told that 600,000 men, not including the women and children. And there's quite a bit of debate about how this number was reached. Some have estimated that this, including the men and the women, went to about 2 to 3 million people in total, leaving Egypt. Now, that's a lot of people, right? That's more than live in the city of Denver proper. That's like 8 times the amount of people who live in Wyoming, right? This is a lot of people. The entire workforce of Pharaoh is now gone. Now pause for just a second and think about this. I spent a lot of time reading excursus after excursus and books that pages and pages and pages have been written about how we got to these numbers, and it can't be that many, or no, it's way more than that, or it's this many, and pages have been written. But can we just say this? Even if the grand total of people who were left during the Exodus was 100 people, isn't that by the almighty, powerful, gracious hand of God? Even if it's 100 people. That God would spare 100 people is unbelievable. That after walking through the Passover events last week, the thought came to mind for me that it was unbelievably merciful of God to spare those who were the second born. You thought about that? That was the mercy of God. That God would spare the third born, that God would spare the fourth born, but that God would call to himself a people, that God would provide a way of escape for an entire group of people. That ought to be unreal to us, no matter what the number. And I tend to land, in most cases, on Scripture speaking for itself. And so when God's Word says that it was 600,000 men, not including the women and children, I tend to think that God powerfully redeemed 600,000 men, not including the women and children, that God did that. This is not primarily, though, about the people. It's about the God who saved them. God saves. And you bring that then into what we're celebrating around Advent, the song we sang earlier, O come, Emmanuel, and ransom captive Israel, all of them. Ransom captive Israel that mourns in lonely exile here until the Son of God appear. And listen, friends, He's appeared. He's appeared. Yes, God worked miraculously to ransom and redeem a people out of Egypt, but that is just a shadow of what was to come. That was just a shadow of what was to come. That's something that causes longing for something more until the Son of God appears, and He has. It is in Jesus Christ alone that we're offered freedom from sin and its consequences, death. That ought to catapult us into worshiping and singing, rejoice, rejoice. Emmanuel, God saves. This is about God. And I think this is what this ought to do in us first. This is what it ought to do. First, just like we've already said, if God has saved you, if God's drawn you to Himself, brought you from a life of pursuing your own desires to a life of worshiping Him, if God has saved you, let that rest. If God has saved you, then the overflow is rejoicing. That ought to be the overflow of our hearts. And I think we take that lightly. This is what God has done. He has drawn you to Himself and saved you. And then secondly, the number of people who were freed from a life of slavery has got to be an encouragement to our efforts in speaking the truth of the gospel to those who do not yet know God. And here's why. God is able to save 600,000 men in one night. Through the shed blood of Jesus, God is able to save anyone who would believe. Anyone who would believe. And so moms and dads, even your son and even your daughter, the blood of Christ is sufficient to save. And husband or wife, God is able to soften the heart of your spouse, to cause them to see their need for a Savior, and then to lovingly draw them into relationship with Him. The blood of Christ is sufficient to save. And God is able to save your aging, set in their ways parents to Himself. Oh, but you don't understand. My dad's 88 years old. You don't know my dad. No, I don't, but God does. And the blood of Christ is sufficient to save. This goes for college roommates, and this goes for your sibling and your coworker and your relative and your neighbor and your friend. The blood of Christ shed on the cross is sufficient to save. And here's what I want to put in front of us as a challenge during this Advent season, because it's in our faces. Here's my question for us. Are you pleading with God that He would save that person? Are you pleading with God that that would happen? Or have you given up? When we read of the Exodus events, this ought to trigger in our hearts and our minds that God is absolutely able, He's absolutely willing, He's absolutely desirous to save those who do not deserve Him. That's God's story of redemption. And here's the thing, we cannot put parameters around who God will save. We cannot put parameters around God's power, God's saving plan. And here's why I would say this based in Exodus. We're told in verse 38. I want you to look at it. Verse 38 of chapter 12. Look at it now. I want you to see this because this was new to me this week. I don't know why I had never seen this. Verse 38. A mixed multitude also went up with them, and very much livestock, both flocks and herds. A better way to read that, a more literal way to read that is, an enormous group of ethnically diverse people also went up with them, and a lot of animals. We do not get to decide who God saves. Now, up until now, I've been thinking this is God's story of redemption. This is God's story of redemption. He's going to redeem a people, the Hebrew people. He's going to redeem a people, the Israelites. And listen, that's who He saves. He does. He frees them from slavery. But in the process, God's powerful hand in and on and through Egypt, those who are looking in, those who are watching, those who are seeing God's power, those who are not of Israel, have also become convinced that there is a better way of life, a more hopeful way of life, of worshiping a powerful God. This was new to me. That ought to be encouraging to us. For weeks I've been anticipating the release from slavery for the Israelite people, and I've had no expectation that it would be anyone else, but that wasn't God's plan. And that wasn't His story of redemption. His story of redemption includes anyone who would believe, anyone who would follow, anyone who would worship, anyone. Listen, your son, your daughter, your dad, your mom, your spouse, your roommate, your friend, anyone who would believe. And we're told that for 430 years, to the very day that God would have this happen, the people were held captive, but no more. No more. God watched over them, and on that night of the Passover, the people, God kept a watch, and the people then kept a night vigil, a night watch in remembrance of what God has done. It is God who saves. This is about God. The Lord is not thrown off or shocked at all by the fact that others have joined in. He's like, hey, hold on, this is only for the Israelites. He's not shocked by that. It's not just the Israelites, and that doesn't shock Him. In fact, He makes provisions for it. Do we see that? We just read through verses and verses and verses on circumcision. You're wondering, why is that in there? He's making provisions for the people who are looking in and wanting to join Him. Verse 43, God says to Moses, the Passover meal, the eating of the lamb, and the unleavened bread is set aside for those who are part of the covenant community. But God does not limit that covenant community to ethnicity. God sets up ways for those to be involved in the celebration who are not a part of the people of Israel. He says the males must be circumcised. Circumcision was a sign of entrance into the covenant community. It was a sign for the people given by God. And so God says, come, celebrate, worship, but identify with my covenant community. This is not about you. This is about me. So identify with my covenant community. This is about the God you are collectively worshiping, the God who saves. And so chapter 12 ends with the primary focus on God, yeah, the people are involved. We've got to see the people here. Yes, they're there, but the primary focus is on God. Verse 51 says, and on that very day, the Lord brought the people out of Israel, out of the land of Egypt by their hosts. Who did? The Lord. God did that. God saves. This is about God. And with all of that in mind, we then go right into chapter 13. That God is the one who provides, and God is the one who saves, and that this is all about God, and we're called into remembrance. We're called into celebrate and remember all that God has done, and God sets the tone for how they must remember what He has done. He sets the tone through a feast of unleavened bread and through the consecration of their firstborn. Let's read some verses from 13 here to finish our time out together. Look at chapter 13, verse 1. God saves, God provides, calls us to remember. Look at verse 1. The Lord said to Moses, "Consecrate to me all the firstborn. Whatever is the first to open the womb among the people of Israel, both of man and of beast, is mine." Then Moses said to the people, "Remember this day in which you came out from Egypt, out of the house of slavery. For by a strong hand the Lord brought you out from this place. No leavened bread shall be eaten. Today, in the month of Abib, you are going out. And when the Lord brings you into the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, which He swore to your fathers to give you, a land flowing with milk and honey, you shall keep this service in this month. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread, and on the seventh day there shall be a feast to the Lord. Unleavened bread shall be eaten for 7 days. No leavened bread shall be seen with you, and no leavened bread shall be seen with you in all your territory. You shall tell your son on that day, it is because of what the Lord did for me when I came out of Egypt. And it shall be to you as a sign on your hand and as a memorial between your eyes, that the law of the Lord may be in your mouth. For with a strong hand the Lord has brought you out of Egypt. You shall therefore keep this statute at its appointed time from year to year. When the Lord brings you into the land of the Canaanites, as He swore to you and your fathers, and shall give it to you, you shall set apart to the Lord all that first opens the womb. All the firstborn of your animals that are males shall be the Lord's. Every firstborn of a donkey you shall redeem with a lamb. Or if you will not redeem it, you shall break its neck. Every firstborn of man among your sons you shall redeem. And when in time to come your son asks you, what does this mean? You shall say to him, by a strong hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt, from the house of slavery. For when Pharaoh stubbornly refused to let us go, the Lord killed all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both the firstborn of man and the firstborn of animals. Therefore I sacrifice to the Lord all the males that first open the womb, but all the firstborn of my sons I redeem. It shall be as a mark on your hand or frontlets between your eyes. For by a strong hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt." And God says, you shall remember this. That's the point. You shall remember these things. And then He does something crucial for us to see. We've got to see this. He reverses the curse of death that He had just brought onto the Egyptians by commanding that they consecrate or set aside all of their firstborn. So you see that reversal. All of the firstborn from Egypt will be slaughtered. And all of the firstborn of the Israelites will be set aside as holy. They'll be set aside as mine, God says. Every firstborn will be set aside as my special possession. It's crucial for us to see that God is calling His redeemed people to remember what He has done in reversing the curse. Remember this, God says. Remember it. This had to be a sobering reminder for the people that their firstborn children were spared. And now God is saying, set them aside, they're mine. Remember, God is saying, honor, celebrate, remember what I have done. They're to be set aside as holy for God, and God says they're mine. This ought to be for us, as we read this and think about it, a sobering reminder as well. And here's why. Because of Christ, we have been reconciled to the Father. Because of Christ, we have been redeemed. Because of Christ, just like the Israelites, not because of anything we've done, but because of Christ, we have been set apart as holy. In fact, Peter reminds us that because of Christ, you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. That we've been chosen as a people, a possession, called from dark to light. Why? So that we could proclaim the excellencies of that very God who called us. This is a reality not just for the Israelites, but for us as well, that God provides and that God saves and that God sets us apart, and we are called to remember that. To look at that and to remember all that he has done by thinking on and reading about and hearing the truths of the gospel and seeing the signs of the gospel week after week after week at these tables where bread is broken and wine is poured for us. This is about God saving a people, providing a way of escape, calling us to be a part of a family, his family. And then Moses says to the people in verse 3, remember. Remember what? What are they called to remember? Remember the day that you were released from slavery? Why are they to remember it? What about it are they to remember? Oh, I remember that day. The weather was nice, and this is what I was wearing. What are they to remember? They're to remember the day they were released. Keep reading in verse 3. For by a strong hand the Lord brought you out from this place. This is about God. Remember, this is about God. It's about God's strong hand. It's not necessarily about your release only. It's about God's strong hand. Of course, there are some things given to the people to be sharp reminders. Moses gives them the requirements again for the Feast of the Bread. This is what that's got to look like. And of course, there are sharp reminders where Moses gives them the requirements of the consecration of the firstborn. Set aside those as mine. Every animal, every human, there's a substitute that's there. If you have a donkey, you replace it with a sheep. There's a substitute. Remember that. Remember. And so God is putting in front of his people ways that they can remember what God has done. And why are those vivid, tangible reminders given? Why? Is it so that the people can remember something about their experience, right? They come home with a t-shirt that says, I was in the Exodus. Why is it that they were given the unleavened bread to eat? They're to remember that. Are they to remember that the Egyptians lost their firstborn? What are they to remember? Again, it goes back to something we touched on last week. This is a discipleship opportunity, isn't it? We see the dads telling their sons why this all happened. When in time your son comes to ask you, Dad, what does this mean? You get a chance to say to them, this is the Lord's strong hand. This is about God. Mark it on your hands. Put it between your eyes. Moses says in verse 16, the very end, by a strong hand, the Lord brought us out of Egypt. 4 times over, he says, by a strong hand, the Lord brought us out of Egypt. This is God's story of redemption. It's about God. Over and over, our attention, our affection, our eyes must be fixed on God. Why? Because this life and everything in it, and the life to come, is about God. Don't let that be simple. Don't let that be elementary. That this life is about God. Allow that to soak into whatever it is you are facing right now. That this life and everything about it is about the glory and the honor and fame of God. That pain and that sorrow and that agony and that frustration and that loneliness that you are facing is in some way, although we may not know why now, is in some way about the glory and honor of God. And that the joys and the happiness and the excitement that you may be experiencing, all of that It is also about the glory and the honor and the fame and the worship of the one true God, the one who sent his Son, born of a virgin, to be Emmanuel, God with us, so that through his death, through Christ being our substitute, we would have life. Whatever it is you're facing, the struggles and the joys, the season, this week, this day is a celebration about who God is and what he has done, about our being his children, not because we deserve it, but because he loves us. Allow that to hit your situation this morning. Let's pray. God, certainly in a room full of people like this morning, there are those who are experiencing great joys, excitement, happiness about the season that's here, maybe even about the circumstances of their life, experiencing great joy. God, I pray that those who are experiencing great joy even this morning, excited about something that's coming up, or excited about whatever it is in life, that you would impress upon their hearts that yes, even that thing is a good gift given to them by you, so that they would be turning to you. That this life and everything in it is about you. And God, certainly in a room of this size with people in it like this, there are some in this room who are facing pain and sorrow this morning. Maybe even pain they have not shared with anyone else, but experiencing pain and sorrow and struggle and suffering, loneliness. God, I pray that you would be the God of comfort, but not comfort just to remove the pain, but comfort so that the eyes would be fixed on you. And God, maybe there are marriages in this room even this morning that are crumbling. That's hard. God, maybe there are people struggling with job loss, people struggling with infertility, people struggling with being single, people struggling financially or whatever. In all kinds of ways, God, we face the brokenness of this world. Health, depression, heartache. We face the brokenness of this world. And in the midst of that, God, I pray that you would be our comfort. Not so that we can be relieved of that pain, but so that our eyes would be fixed on you. Where that's not true, I pray that you would redirect our hearts. Help us to see that you have saved us and called us to be a people so that we can worship you because you're worthy of it. So worthy that you would send your Son to a broken place like this to redeem, to ransom, to reconcile. In love, you have called us to be your children. God, would that drive our weeks ahead as we consider the celebration of your Son. This is all about you, God. Amen.